Tonight was a celebration, the city's annual policy forum, a glittering evening where intellect danced with ego and rhetoric was served like wine. Eleanor stood at the edge of the stage, hands folded neatly in front of her. A modest, navy blue dress, not designer, not even expensive, hung gently from her shoulders. Her hair was tucked back with a plain pin. She was the only one on stage without makeup, professionally done, without an entourage, without a name anyone remembered. But she smiled softly, as if she knew something no one else did. A senator sat nearby, laughing too loudly at his own anecdote. Cameras loved him. His voice filled the room like he owned it. He didn't notice Eleanor, not really, just the invited, local, the charity participant, the seat filler, the woman no one was worried about. Then she looked toward the crowd. Her eyes didn't sparkle with ambition, nor flicker with fear. They were calm, still, like water before a storm. And for just a second, in that calm, something cracked. A senator's aide checked his phone and frowned. Two names had swapped places in the speaking schedule. Someone had changed something. No one noticed Eleanor's faint smile sharpen, like a blade catching the light. Eleanor Quinn was the kind of woman most people forgot in a crowded room. Not because she lacked charm or intelligence, but because she wore them quietly, like a scarf tucked into a coat. She had grown up in the small town of Briar Hollow, tucked between rustling wheat fields and time-worn fences. Her father, a school janitor, never spoke in long sentences. Her mother, a retired nurse, spent her afternoons pressing wildflowers into old books. There were no vacations, no fine things, no noise, only books, long walks, and the rhythm of quiet living. Eleanor's voice had always been soft, but her mind was anything but. As a child, she read courtroom transcripts like fairy tales. The first time she heard the phrase "objection, Your Honor," she whispered it to herself for days, pretending her bedroom was a courtroom and the hallway light was a spotlight. Debate didn't excite her because of the spotlight, though. Was the precision, the structure, how words could be both shield and sword. By 16, she had won her school's debate tournament, not with fire, but with focus. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward with drama. She simply waited until her opponent made one wrong step, and then she asked a question they didn't expect. She had never liked being the center of attention, but she loved knowing she was the one people underestimated right until they lost. Years later, she would still walk with her eyes slightly lowered, her steps careful, her words measured. She took jobs no one fought for: community education director, grant writer, assistant to the assistant on a city council subcommittee. She wasn't chasing titles. She was building something slower, deeper. Her loyalty ran deep, especially to those who saw her worth when the world didn't. Like Jonah. Jonah Ford was once a young, charming congressional candidate with a grin that could melt frost and the kind of handshake that felt like a promise. Eleanor met him while interning during her last year of community college. She was 22, quiet, unnoticed. He was 35, fast-talking, rising. She corrected a statistic in his speech notes, a small thing, a decimal out of place, and instead of brushing her off, he paused, smiled, and said, "Sharp, you keep those on me." It was the first time someone in power had seen her, really seen her. From then on, Eleanor became his shadow. She edited his speeches, double-checked his facts, organized grassroots forums no one else bothered with. She even handled community Q&As when he was too busy or tired. She watched how he charmed rooms, how he folded his sleeves to make himself look approachable, how he modulated his voice depending on who sat across the table. She didn't mind. It was politics. Everyone wore masks, but she believed in what he said. At least she used to. He talked about giving a voice to the voiceless, about restoring dignity, about transparency. He told her once, late at night over cold coffee and legal pads, "You're the smartest person in this room, Eleanor. You just don't talk enough for people to know it." She remembered that, word for word, and when the promotion never came, when her name was left off the official staff directory, when her budget got slashed but Jonah's wardrobe got tailored, she still stayed. Loyalty, she told herself, wasn't about being thanked. It was about staying when no one else would. Besides, Jonah had made promises. "When I get there," he once whispered, nodding toward the Capitol on a trip to D.C., "you, come with me. You'll be the real voice behind the curtain." But months passed, years. She saw interns promoted past her, donors she'd never met, praised for work she'd done. Jonah's speeches became slicker, emptier. His eyes changed, too not cruel, just distant, like he'd learned how to look through people instead of at them. She started to feel like a folding chair in a marble room, useful but not part of the design. Still, she stayed, not for glory, not even for Jonah, but for the communities she served, the parents who needed after-school programs, the kids who showed up hungry and angry and misunderstood. She stayed because quitting meant leaving them in silence. But something shifted the day Jonah announced he was running for state senate. He didn't tell her himself. She read it in a press release. Her name wasn't in the thank you section, not even once. Later that day, she passed by his office and heard him laughing with the new communications director, a younger woman with loud opinions and heels that clicked too hard on the floor. He was quoting a joke Eleanor had written word for word. The room erupted in applause. No one clapped for her. That night, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, hands still, face blank, while the tea went cold. Beside her, her reflection in the dark window didn't blink. She wasn't angry. She was quiet. And in that quiet, something began to gather. Not revenge, not ego, just truth like rainwater in a rusted pail. Slowly, steadily, she didn't want a spotlight. She wanted one moment where her voice wasn't borrowed, corrected, or forgotten. Just one. The first crack was small, a forgotten call. Eleanor had submitted a revised policy draft to Jonah's campaign weeks ago. It was about equitable housing, a quiet, unglamorous subject, but one that mattered to the families. Eleanor met every Thursday at the church basement food drive. She'd spent long evenings researching zoning loopholes, talking to exhausted single mothers, cross-referencing budgets line by line. Jonah had smiled when she handed it in. Perfect, he said, barely glancing at the cover. We'll include it in the community town hall briefing next week. But on the day of the event, Jonah's voice echoed from the stage, praising a plan that wasn't hers. The proposal was thinner, louder, shinier. It had statistics, not stories. Buzzwords, not substance. Her name wasn't mentioned. When she asked about it afterward, he chuckled, brushing it off with that practiced warmth. Ellie, you know how this works. Voters don't care about footnotes. You're the heart of the work, but sometimes we need a bit of flash to sell it. She forced a smile. It was always we when something succeeded, always you when something didn't. First, she told herself it was nothing. Jonah was tired. He had a campaign to run. Maybe she was being sensitive, but then the speeches started to feel familiar. Too familiar. Phrases she had written late into the night, ideas she'd shared only in private emails, began to show up in Jonah's interviews without mention, without credit. She watched him talk about poverty like he'd spent nights in soup kitchens, about education reform like he'd taught in underfunded schools. He hadn't. She had. Still, no one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they didn't care. At the weekly staff meeting, Eleanor pointed out that their proposed funding model didn't match the latest district numbers. The new campaign manager, Caleb, smiled in that way. Polished men smile when they think a woman is about to become a problem. We're not aiming for accuracy, Eleanor. We're aiming for belief. She looked at him. But belief built on what? He shrugged. Momentum. And Jonah's momentum is real. The room nodded. She didn't. Days later, Jonah's face appeared on local television again. He was debating another candidate, a seasoned woman named Marla Chambers. Eleanor respected her. She spoke plainly, and she didn't interrupt. Mid-debate, Jonah repeated one of Eleanor's lines, one she'd shared in a private draft the night before. Pride doesn't fill empty stomachs. Dignity without action is decoration. The room clapped. Jonah smiled like he'd invented it. Eleanor sat at home watching, hands clenched in her lap. She had always told herself the mission mattered more than the credit. But now the mission was being rebranded, twisted into slogans, and she was watching it happen through a screen like a stranger. A few days later, she found the campaign's internal notes for an upcoming event. Her entire debate outline, weeks of research, carefully written counters, personalized stories from real constituents, had been lifted, edited, and assigned to Caleb to deliver in Jonah's name. She confronted him. You're using my words. Without asking. Caleb didn't look up from his laptop. You work here. Everything you produce is campaign property. You know that. I didn't sign that away. He gave a short laugh. Do you want to be difficult about this? That night, Eleanor walked the length of her apartment in silence. Back and forth. She passed her bookshelf, law texts, transcripts, books with tabs and pencil marks. Her phone buzzed with reminders. Grant proposal due, church food drive, Jonah's prep session. She turned it over, face down. There were no explosions, no betrayals shouted in hallways, just the quiet collapse of something she'd believed in, brick by unnoticed brick. She stopped sleeping, not out of sadness, not anger. Something colder had settled in, the understanding that she had been used and that no one cared to hide it anymore. In public, she smiled. She still attended the meetings. She still answered emails. emails. She was still Ellie, the reliable one, the quiet helper, but something had changed behind her eyes. She began listening differently, watching differently, noticing what others ignored, who was praised, who was overlooked, who spoke and who was spoken over, and the cracks widened. Jonah had always told her politics was about the long game. Now she realized it wasn't a game, it was a script, and someone else had taken her lines. It happened in a quiet room, not a grand courtroom, not a press conference, just a supply closet-turned office at campaign headquarters, where old banners leaned against water-stained walls and forgotten boxes hummed under a flickering bulb. Eleanor had stopped by late. The building was mostly empty, footsteps distant, voices muffled by walls and ambition. She came to pick up her notes for the upcoming public debate. Her name wasn't officially on the list of speakers, but she had been working on the content behind the scenes, shaping responses, drafting rebuttals. It was supposed to be a simple visit, but the door to the main meeting room was slightly ajar. Light spilled into the hallway like a secret trying to escape. Voices, familiar ones. She paused. Jonah, Caleb, a few senior aides. Laughter, then silence. Then Jonah's voice, clearer than she wanted it to be. She doesn't even know she's being used. A pause. Then Caleb, she's smart, but she doesn't get how this works. You let her feel needed. She stays. Quiet. It's useful. More laughter. Casual. Thoughtless. Eleanor didn't move. Honestly, Jonah said, tone low, we should stop letting her near anything public. Her voice, it's too soft. Doesn't hit. Not good for optics. People want to fight, not a bedtime story, another voice added. And then Jonah, the man who once called her his compass, spoke again. She'll do the work no one notices. That's what she's good at. She's comfortable in the background. Something dropped in Eleanor's chest. Not fast, not sudden. It was slow like a floor, sinking an inch at a time under her feet. She backed away quietly. No door creak, no stumble. Just one step after another until the light no longer touched her shoes. In the hallway, she felt her breath leave her. Not gasping, not dramatic, just gone. The silence wrapped around her like snow. For a long time, she stood there, staring at nothing, trying to hold herself still. The edges of her vision blurred. She blinked once, twice. Not tears, just disbelief. A soft, hollow cold had begun to settle in her bones. She walked into her small office, sat down, and opened her laptop. For minutes, she stared at the cursor blinking on a blank screen. It reminded her of a heartbeat, steady, patient, waiting. Then, like a machine long overdue, she began to type. Not speeches, not outlines, questions. She opened folders, email threads, internal memos. She traced policies and promises. She followed where Jonah had borrowed, where Caleb had stitched together talking points stolen from interns, volunteers, even constituents. She compared timelines when she sent drafts, and when Jonah claimed them publicly. She found edits in her documents made after midnight, but not by her. He'd been feeding her work into a machine that had no place for her name, no place for her face. It wasn't just disrespect, it was theft. Quiet, calculated, systemic theft. And worse, he didn't think it mattered. As she kept digging, she found something else. A donor file, hidden under an obscure folder titled Strategy B. It listed speaking events, public town halls, debate appearances, and under special guest for the televised policy. Forum debate. Caleb Parker, community perspective. Caleb? He hadn't stepped foot in a single low-income neighborhood. He'd never once attended Eleanor's education roundtables or community dinners. Yet there he was, scheduled to speak as the voice of the people. She scrolled lower. Original placement, Eleanor Quinn. Status, removed, too passive. Notes, replace with stronger male presence. Aligns better with optics. She leaned back, and in that still moment, she felt nothing. Not rage, just quiet. Deep, unshakable quiet. Outside her small window, the city lights blinked on one by one. The streets below moved in. A rhythm that never noticed people like her. People who made the wheel turn but never stood at the center. Eleanor closed the file. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But her chest rose just once with the kind of breath that comes before something irreversible. She walked to the mirror above the coat rack. Looked at herself. Hair pulled back. Plain earrings. Tired eyes. For the first time, she saw not what was missing, but what had been buried. The girl who debated with stillness, who waited for the mistake, who used silence like a scalpel. They'd mistaken her quiet for weakness. They had no idea what they had taught her. In that moment, she made a decision. She would not expose them with noise. She would not storm out or send dramatic emails. She would walk back into their world, smile, help, listen, and then, when it mattered, when the lights were on and the cameras were rolling, she would take her voice back, not with anger, but with precision. precision. The days after her discovery moved like fog, thick, slow, without direction. Eleanor still showed up, still took notes, still gave polite nods in meetings. No one noticed the shift because no one was looking. Her silence had always been expected, her diligence taken for granted. She wore it like a second skin, now hardened with something colder, distance. But inside, everything had changed. She could no longer hear Jonah's voice without hearing the echo of betrayal. Every word sounded like an act. Every handshake looked rehearsed. Every compliment a rehearsed deflection. She studied him the way someone studies a stranger at the table where family used to sit. He hadn't changed. He had just stopped pretending when he thought she wasn't watching. She stopped eating with the team, stopped responding to Caleb's casual jokes. Even small talk felt dangerous now, as if any word she shared could be stolen, repackaged, stripped of her fingerprints. One night, Eleanor stood in her tiny kitchen, the overhead light flickering as it always did. When the microwave was running, a half-eaten sandwich sat on the counter. Her coat was still on. She hadn't realized how cold her hands were until they trembled against the ceramic mug. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. "You okay? Haven't heard from you. Miss you." She didn't reply. How could she explain that her silence wasn't sadness? It was a reckoning, that she wasn't just hurt. She was unraveling a version of herself she'd built for years. For so long, Eleanor had believed that doing the right thing meant staying out of the spotlight, that integrity was quiet, that the mission was always bigger than the self. But now she wondered if that belief had been planted in her, not taught but fed, told to. Women like her in polite tones. Don't speak too loud. Don't take up too much space. Be useful, not seen. She remembered sitting in classrooms, watching boys interrupt teachers with confidence and half-facts, while she waited her turn with answers she knew were right. She remembered praise that sounded like pity. You're thoughtful. You're modest. You're dependable. Not brilliant. Not strong. Just safe. Jonah had built his campaign on those same soft lies, and she had helped him. That was the worst part. She wasn't just betrayed. She had been complicit in her own erasure. That realization came hardest at night, when the city was quiet and the stories she had silenced began to speak back to her. The mother who cried over rent in the church basement, the teacher who worked 3 jobs, the immigrant woman who whispered about being ignored by police. Eleanor had taken their stories and handed them over to men who sold them like merchandise. She wanted to scream, but instead, she opened her laptop and began to write again. Not speeches, letters, to herself, to the women she had met, to the version of her who once thought that staying small was virtuous. Each sentence was a reckoning, each word a confession. She no longer knew what her place was in this campaign, or even in this world. She didn't know if she would still believe in public service when this was over. She had loved it deeply, but now that love felt foolish, childlike, the kind of love you give to someone who hasn't earned it. She passed Jonah in the hallway a few days later. He smiled. "Ellie, everything good?" She paused, looked at him, and something in her eyes made his smile flicker, just slightly. "Yes," she said, with a calm he hadn't earned. "Everything's fine." She walked on, left him standing there. Inside, she was anything but fine. She had lost something, and she didn't know how to name it. Not just trust, but purpose, direction, even identity. Without the role she had played, the silent builder, the loyal supporter, who was she? She used to take pride in being invisible. Now it felt like a scar. In the mirror, her reflection looked back at her with a question. What now? And for once, Eleanor didn't have an answer. The stage was cold under her heels. Not literally, the lights were warm, almost too much so, but something about the polished floor and the silence between applause felt sterile, like a hospital waiting room before bad news. Eleanor stood off to the side, waiting for the moment she was never supposed to have. The policy forum debate had become a spectacle, lights, camera angles, sound cues, rehearsed like a play. Every moment had been scripted, planned to highlight key faces, the usual ones. Jonah was seated confidently at center. Caleb stood a few feet away, his tie straightened by. One of the handler's moments before. The air around them buzzed with practiced confidence. Eleanor, on the other hand, wore no makeup. She had declined it. Her blouse was simple, her voice mic clipped by a tired technician who gave her a nod that felt more human than anything she'd felt in weeks. She hadn't been announced. She hadn't been on the lineup, but something had changed. A late dropout, a timing gap, a producer scrambling for a filler, and someone, a junior staffer who had always noticed how much Eleanor Eleanor worked without praise, had whispered, "She has something to say." Now, the moderator's voice echoed, "And now, we welcome Eleanor Quinn." A pause, a smattering of polite applause. Confused, like, Jonah turned toward her like he'd seen a ghost walk on stage. His eyes narrowed, calculating. Eleanor stepped forward, not with force, not with power, with intention. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the mic. The podium was taller than it looked. The room was darker than it felt on screen. She cleared her throat. "Good evening." Her voice was steady, not loud, just sure. "I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight, but sometimes silence is more dangerous than speaking without permission." The audience hushed. Somewhere in the shadows, Caleb shifted. Jonah's smile was tight, his jaw unmoving. Man who didn't know how to stop a machine once it started turning. Eleanor looked out over the crowd. Not at Jonah, not at Caleb, at the people. "I have spent the last year working behind this campaign, shaping words, gathering stories, writing policies. I did it quietly because I believed that serving was about lifting others. I believed that truth mattered more than credit." She paused. "But I was wrong about something." Silence fell like snow, soft but total. "I thought integrity meant invisibility. I thought the good work would be enough to protect me from exploitation, that doing the right thing would be recognized by the people I trusted." She swallowed. Her eyes scanned the crowd but focused on no one. "But the people I trusted saw me as useful, not valuable, quiet, not wise, replaceable." The words sat heavy in the air. "Tonight I won't name names. I won't attack. I won't shout. That's not who I am." A pause, breath, stillness. "But I will speak." Her voice strengthened. "Because I know what it feels like to hand over your voice and watch someone else wear it. I know what it feels like to be told your truth is too soft for the stage, that your story is better told by someone louder, taller, more camera-ready." Now Jonah was no longer smiling. His hand rested on the table, clenched. "I'm here to say enough." Her words weren't dramatic. They didn't roar, but they hit like rain on dry earth. "I don't want your spotlight. I want my name back, my worth, my voice. I will not be quiet so someone else can appear strong. I will not be modest so someone else can shine." The room didn't erupt. It breathed, collective, slow, like people remembering something they had forgotten. She looked toward Jonah then, just for a second. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, because there was nothing to say. He had already spoken, behind closed doors, in small cruel jokes, in decisions made. Without her, he had spoken for too long. Now it was her turn. Eleanor stepped back from the podium. The silence held, stretched, then broke with a slow ripple of applause, not loud, not choreographed. Real. Some people stood, some didn't. That was fine. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to be heard. Backstage, Jonah approached, his voice low. "What the hell was that?" Eleanor looked at him. "The truth." He opened his mouth, closed it, and then walked away. She didn't follow. Later, she sat in the quiet of her apartment, shoes off, jacket folded neatly on the chair. The applause still rang faintly in her mind, not like a victory, but like a bell tolling something old and buried. She didn't feel proud. Not exactly. She felt clear. For the first time in a long while, she had spoken, and she was still here. Have you ever discovered a truth that shattered something you once believed in? Not suddenly, but slowly, like wallpaper peeling in a familiar room, revealing something colder underneath. Have you ever looked at someone you once trusted and realized they only loved your silence? What do we owe ourselves when the people we built our lives around betray us? When loyalty becomes a leash? When being quiet starts to feel like being erased? Eleanor's story isn't just hers. It belongs to anyone who was told to stay in the background, even while holding everything together. To anyone who mistook being overlooked for being safe. To anyone who has ever had to choose between being liked and being true. So, let us ask you, have you ever stood at that edge? When you knew speaking up would cost something, maybe everything, but silence would cost your soul? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Someone else might need to read your words tonight. And if you know someone who's starting over, not loudly, not publicly, but quietly, share this with them. Remind them they are not alone. Leave a comment, subscribe. Let this story reach the ones still sitting in the shadows, wondering if their voice is worth hearing. Because some endings don't echo loudly. They close like a door in the dark, but change everything behind it.